You cannot build peace on top of what you refuse to release. That is the foundation. And most people never question it. They search for peace in more money, more achievement, more affirmation, more distraction. But peace does not come from more. It comes from less attachment, less noise, less pretending, and less only arrives. When you start letting go. Letting go is not weakness. It is wisdom. The wisdom to know what no longer serves you, what no longer aligns with you, what no longer reflects who you are becoming. But most will never let go because they fear loss more than they desire freedom. They cling to what is familiar even when it hurts, even when it drains them, even when it delays their growth. But the truth is, you cannot carry peace and carry what poisons you at the same time. Something has to go. And that is where life begins to shift. Not when you add something new, but when you finally release what you should have let go of years ago. This is not easy, but it is necessary. And the first thing you must let go of to live a peaceful life is the need to be understood. You spend so much energy trying to explain yourself to people who have no intention of understanding you. You justify your silence, you defend your standards, you explain your boundaries. But here's the truth. They already decided who you are before you opened your mouth. And no amount of explaining will change that. Let it go. Let go of the urge to convince the unwilling. Let go of the obsession with being seen correctly by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You do not need agreement to live in alignment. You do not need applause to stay in peace. You need to trust that the people who are meant for you will not need paragraphs to feel your presence, that your silence can be enough, that your posture can speak louder than your defense. When you let go of the need to be understood, you free your energy to focus on what matters. Not the external perception, but the internal reality. You feel light. You feel free. You feel unbothered. Because now you are not chasing approval. You are walking in purpose, and purpose is not always popular. The second thing you must let go of is the habit of comparison. Comparison is the thief of peace. Not because others are better, but because comparison disconnects you from your own journey. You begin to doubt your pace, you question your progress, you resent your process. But what if you are exactly where you need to be? What if your path is not supposed to look like theirs? What if your timeline was never meant to match theirs? Let it go. Let go of the need to measure yourself against standards that do not reflect your calling. Let go of the urge to scroll through someone else's highlights and use it to judge your behind the scenes. Because real peace is born when you choose presence over performance, when you choose to be here now, with what you have, as you are. No rush, no race, no need to impress, just progress, anchored in presence. That is where peace lives. And that's what we'll build in every part of this journey. When you stop comparing, you start connecting with yourself, with your path, with the moment, and most importantly, with peace. Because comparison is not just about others, it's about avoidance. It's easier to judge their success than to face your own hesitation. It's easier to question their confidence than to confront your insecurity. But that only delays your growth. Peace requires you to pause, to stop looking sideways and start looking inward. To ask, what do I actually want? Not what looks good, not what they're doing, not what will get me praise, but what actually aligns with my truth. Because until you know that, you will keep chasing what isn't yours and wonder why it feels so heavy. Comparison creates pressure. Alignment creates peace, and you cannot have both. Let go of the scoreboard. Let go of the obsession with being ahead, with being seen, with being impressive. You don't need to be the best. You need to be whole. You don't need their pace. You need your rhythm, and your rhythm cannot be rushed or replicated. It must be respected, and the only way to respect it is to stop comparing it. Your timeline is sacred. Your lessons are personal. Your journey is enough, but you must let go of the illusion that everyone else has it all figured out. They don't. They're posting confidence and living confusion. They're showing strength and hiding pain. So stop comparing your struggle to their performance. You don't know the whole story, but you do know yours. So write it with presence. Live it with peace. That brings us to the third thing you must let go of. Control. This one runs deep, because we're taught that if we can control enough variables, we can avoid pain. If we say the right things, they won't leave. If we plan far enough ahead, we won't fail. If we work hard enough, we'll never be criticized. But life doesn't care about control. It will unfold in its own rhythm. No matter how hard you hold on, no matter how careful you try to be, there will be interruptions, losses, changes, betrayals. Not because you failed, but because that's life. And the tighter you grip, the more peace you lose. You cannot hold peace with clenched fists. You hold it with open hands. You hold it by learning to surrender without giving up. Surrender is not weakness, it's trust. Trust in the process. Trust in your preparation. Trust that even if it falls apart, you can rebuild. Because real peace doesn't mean nothing goes wrong. It means you no longer collapse. When it does, you breathe. You recalibrate. You respond instead of reacting. That is the mindset of a peaceful man, not soft, but settled. Not passive, but present. Not afraid of what he cannot control because he's fully grounded in what he can. And that's the shift. You stop trying to manipulate outcomes, and you start mastering your inner world. You stop trying to control how they see you, and start controlling how you show up. You stop trying to force certainty, and start choosing clarity. Because clarity is always in your hands, even when control is not. And from that place you move lighter. You live freer. You speak slower. You breathe deeper. Because now you're not trying to bend reality. You're aligned with it. That alignment is where peace lives. And it brings us to the fourth thing you must let go of. The past. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defines you. You are not your past. Not your mistakes. Not your failures. Not your trauma. Not your labels. The past happened. Yes. But it is not your home. It is a place you pass through. Not a place you have to live in, but you only move forward when you stop rehearsing the pain. When you stop replaying the moment that broke you. When you stop identifying with the story that hurt you. It's not about pretending it didn't happen. It's about deciding it will not shape your future. Because peace is not found in fixing the past. It's found in freeing yourself from it. And that freedom only begins when you let go of the need to relive it. You're not here to keep bleeding from wounds you already survived. You're here to become the version of you that those wounds prepared. And he does not live in the past. He walks forward with scars, not shame, with wisdom, not weight, with strength, not resentment. Because he knows the only thing the past can give you is a lesson. Take the lesson, leave the rest. That is how peace begins. Peace does not arrive when everything is perfect. It arrives when you no longer allow your imperfections to define your identity. And most people never reach this point because they confuse pain with permanence. They think, if it hurt me, it must still have power over me. But the truth is, pain shapes you only if you keep rehearsing it. You don't have to keep telling the story of how you were wounded. You don't have to keep carrying the emotions that belonged to a former version of you. You don't have to keep justifying your triggers as part of your identity. You can pause. You can rewrite. You can reclaim the authorship of your own mind. And that's where peace begins. When you stop asking, why did it happen to me? And start asking, what can I create because it happened? That shift takes you from victimhood to vision, from blame to building, from exhaustion to ownership. And ownership is the soil where peace grows. Because once you own your mind, you don't hand it over to people who didn't build it. You stop giving the past permission to interrupt your present. You stop letting people live in your head, rent-free. You stop letting the old you make decisions for the future you. You draw a line, not with resentment, but with resolve. The version of you that lived in that story doesn't need to come with you. You thank him, you bless him, and you let him go. Because the longer you hold him, the longer you delay the man you were meant to become. And the man you were meant to become has peace. Not because life is easy, but because he no longer invites confusion to sit at his table. He has forgiven. Not because they deserved it, but because he deserves peace. He has released. Not because he forgot, but because he chose to move forward with freedom instead of chains. And that leads us to the fifth thing you must let go of: resentment. Resentment is heavy, and it is silent. It builds in the background, in the small moments, in the conversations you replay, in the justice you never got, in the apology they never gave. It grows while you sleep. It sharpens every time you scroll past their success. It whispers that holding on is protecting you, but it's not. It's poisoning you. Because resentment doesn't just trap them, it traps you. It wraps your thoughts in judgment. It clouds your clarity. It makes you reactive to things that don't even deserve your attention. And worst of all, it tells you that until they hurt, you cannot heal. That is a lie. You do not need them to break in order to rise. You do not need them to lose in order to win. You do not need them to feel your pain in order to be released from it. What you need is to let go, to set it down. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer gets to control you. Because peace is not something they can give you. It is something you build when you finally decide to stop holding on to things that no longer serve your highest self. Letting go of resentment is not about erasing the past. It's about refusing to allow it to dictate the pace and posture of your present. It's about reclaiming energy that has been leaking into conversations you never had, into fantasies of revenge, into memories that stopped helping you long ago. Forgiveness is not a feeling. It is a choice. A choice to free yourself from the chains you didn't even realize you were tightening. A choice to say, I am done carrying what is not mine. And that is the gateway to peace. Because when resentment leaves, clarity enters. You stop seeing people through the lens of pain. You start seeing them through the lens of presence. You stop needing closure because you become the one who closes the loop within yourself. No conversation, no apology, no grand moment, just you in stillness, making a decision that today is the day you stop bleeding over wounds that are already scarred. And in that moment, you breathe differently, you walk differently, you speak with more softness because you no longer carry sharpness under your skin. This is the beginning of a peaceful life, not because you removed everything painful, but because you learned how to carry nothing that isn't yours. You begin to live differently when you stop fighting battles that no longer belong to you. You stop defending your name in rooms you don't even belong in. You stop answering questions that don't serve your growth. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who were never qualified to measure it. This is where peace enters. It doesn't knock. It doesn't ask for attention. It arrives quietly. The moment you stop handing your energy to every voice that tries to disrupt you. Because peace is not about silence in the world. It's about silence in your soul even when the world is loud. That kind of peace comes from boundaries, not walls, but wisdom. You begin to understand that not everyone gets access. Not every invitation deserves a response. Not every confrontation is worth your breath. This is not arrogance. It is awareness. You no longer walk into chaos thinking you can fix it. You no longer overextend just to feel useful. You no longer explain what alignment already confirms. Because peace is not something you chase. It's something you protect, and that protection begins with who you allow in. Letting go is not always external. Sometimes it's about letting go of roles you were never meant to carry. The role of fixer, the role of savior, the role of emotional anchor. For people who never anchor themselves, you let go. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that your peace matters too. That your space, your clarity, your time deserves the same energy you once gave away so freely. This is the shift, where you no longer bleed for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage, where you stop breaking yourself to hold others together, where you realize that self-abandonment is not the same as kindness. And once you let go of the need to be everything to everyone, you begin to become everything you were meant to be to yourself. Because the most dangerous thing you can lose is not time or money or opportunity. It's yourself. And for many, that loss doesn't come all at once. It comes in small compromises, in subtle silences, in the quiet acceptance of being treated in ways you would never wish on someone you love. But peace calls you back. It whispers that you are allowed to live a life that feels like home to your soul, even if that means fewer people understand you. Even if that means you walk alone for a while. Because solitude with peace is better than community with confusion. Let go of the need to be included, when inclusion costs you your identity. Let go of the conversations that always leave you feeling smaller. Let go of the need to win people who only show up when you're losing yourself. You are not here to beg for belonging. You are here to build a life that aligns so deeply that anything not meant for you falls away. Naturally, this is the wisdom of letting go. It is not harsh. It is holy. It is not about rejection. It is about realignment. You are not walking away from them. You are walking back to you, and in that return, you find peace. Not the kind sold in books or promised by influencers, but the kind that shows up when your actions match your values, when your yes is honest, when your no is firm, when your presence is no longer for performance but for purpose, because you no longer need to be seen to feel significant. You no longer need to be validated to feel valuable. You no longer need to be praised to feel powerful. You are powerful because you are finally whole. Not because everything makes sense, but because you've stopped trying to make sense of things that were never yours to carry. This is peace. Not in theory, but in practice. Not in moments, but in rhythm. Not in escape, but in embodiment. You live it by letting go. Letting go is not a single moment. It's a decision you recommit to every day, every breath, every time your mind wants to wander back to what once was. Because the things you let go of will come knocking again. The past will knock. The need for control will knock. The craving for validation will knock. The habits you've outgrown will knock. And every knock is not a sign to return. It is a test of whether you're truly committed to peace. Peace is not built in the absence of temptation. It's built in your response to it. When you feel the pull to explain yourself, but you choose stillness instead. When you feel the urge to compare, but you return to gratitude. When you feel the pressure to fix what isn't yours, and instead choose to protect your own energy. This is where peace becomes permanent. Because peace is not an event. It is a habit. And like any habit, it must be protected. You must build rituals that remind you of what you've released. Moments of stillness to center your nervous system. Journaling to clear your thoughts. Movement to anchor your body. Reflection to reconnect to your truth. These are not luxuries. They are necessities. In a world that profits from your confusion, your clarity must be a daily practice. And that clarity only deepens when you give yourself permission to stop carrying what is no longer yours. That includes other people's expectations, other people's timelines, other people's perceptions of who you should be. You do not owe anyone a version of you that no longer aligns with your peace. And that is not selfish. It is sacred. Because for too long you were taught that sacrifice means saying yes, even when you're tired, even when you're drained, even when you're breaking. But peace teaches you that the real sacrifice is abandoning yourself for the comfort of others. You can care and still say no. You can love and still leave. You can support without surrendering your sanity. Because peace is not about removing yourself from life. It's about engaging with life from a place of centered presence. And presence requires boundaries. You must define what enters your space, what earns your energy, what deserves your yes. And you must enforce that definition even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's misunderstood. Because every yes you give out of guilt is a no to your own growth. And growth is what peace demands. Peace and growth are not separate. Growth is what creates the foundation for peace to rest on. Because when you grow, you stop repeating, you stop replaying, you stop returning to cycles that feel familiar but rob you of your power. And growth is not loud. It is subtle. It's choosing to pause instead of lash out. It's walking away without the need to explain. It's ending the day with integrity, even if no one else noticed your restraint. This is the hidden work. The work that doesn't go on your resume. The work that doesn't earn likes. The work that doesn't need recognition. Because it already gave you something deeper. Self-respect. The quiet knowing that you are no longer betraying yourself to keep the peace externally, because you have chosen to build it internally, and now you protect it relentlessly. This is your new standard. I do not engage with anything that costs me my peace. Not because I'm better, but because I'm clear. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm aligned. Not because I don't care, but because I finally understand that my care must begin with me. That if I do not honor myself, no one else can truly experience the best of me. Letting go was never about abandonment. It was about arrival. Arrival into presence, into purpose, into peace. And you have arrived. There is a version of you who doesn't rush anymore. He doesn't chase conversations that never lead anywhere. He doesn't explain what alignment already confirms. He doesn't apologize for choosing peace over chaos. That version doesn't arrive by accident. He is built by discipline, by boundaries, by thousands of small decisions made quietly without fanfare, without applause. You don't become peaceful by avoiding problems. You become peaceful by no longer being controlled by them, by choosing not to attend every argument, not to absorb every projection, not to correct every misperception. Because peace is not just what you feel, it's what you allow into your mind, your space, your schedule, your spirit. And the problem isn't that life is loud, it's that your door has been too open for too long. You've let too many voices in, too many opinions, too many obligations that never matched your mission. So now you close the door, gently, firmly, without guilt. Because guilt is not the measure of goodness, and discomfort is not a signal that you're wrong. Sometimes discomfort is just growth, stretching you beyond what your old self considered safe, and guilt is just a residue from a lifetime of saying yes when you really meant no. That guilt is not your guide. Your guide is the stillness that comes when your choices match your core. That is the map. That is the signal. That is peace. But to follow that map, you must let go of one more thing. You must let go of your need to feel ready. Because peace doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It grows in the middle of your mess. It rises while the noise is still loud. It lives inside the decision to act with clarity before comfort arrives. And readiness is the trap that convinces you to delay what you already know must be done. It says, not yet. Not until you're more confident. Not until it's safer. Not until someone validates it. But peace doesn't come when others approve. It comes when you stop betraying yourself. To wait for that approval, and most people live in delay. Not because they lack answers, but because they fear losing the identities they've built around their confusion. It's familiar to be stuck. It's predictable to stay overwhelmed. There's comfort in not deciding, because indecision doesn't ask you to be responsible. But peace requires responsibility. Responsibility for what you choose, what you think, what you allow, what you believe. Because everything you allow, you are training yourself to tolerate, and everything you tolerate becomes part of your identity. So the question is, what are you reinforcing? Are you reinforcing the habit of escaping discomfort, of rationalizing chaos, of absorbing everyone's emotions and calling it empathy? Or are you reinforcing a life of intention, a rhythm of presence, a tone of truth, a posture of principle? This is what matters now. You've done enough performing. You've done enough carrying. You've done enough explaining. Now you protect. You protect your mornings. You protect your focus. You protect your nervous system from people who treat access as entitlement, and in doing that, you finally create the space to meet the version of you that doesn't need healing, but honoring. The version that always existed, beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the overthinking, beneath the exhaustion. He was always there, waiting, watching, hoping you'd come back to him. And when you do, you realize peace was never a destination. It was your original state. You were just too distracted to recognize it. Now that distraction is gone, and what remains is not an empty room, but a sacred one. A room filled with silence that strengthens, with solitude that restores, with breath that anchors. You no longer need the noise, you no longer need the chase, you have returned to what is real. The more you return to yourself, the more you realize peace was never missing. It was only muffled, buried beneath obligations you never questioned, muted by noise you normalized, distorted by standards that were never yours, and now you've cleared the space, not all at once, but piece by piece, choice by choice, boundary by boundary. And in that quiet, you start to hear something different. You start to hear your breath unrushed. You start to hear your thoughts unfiltered. You start to hear your life without the static. And it's here that the final kind of letting go begins. Letting go of the story. The one you've been telling every time you explain why you're stuck or slow or afraid or hesitant. The story that says you have to earn rest, that you're only valuable when you're productive, that your pain makes you interesting. You've told it well, you've told it often, you've told it so convincingly that you began to believe it. But it's time to put it down, because stories are supposed to serve you, not suffocate you. They are tools, not traps. And if your story no longer helps you grow, it's not your truth. It's your past wearing a mask. You get to rewrite it. You get to edit. You get to evolve. Even if others don't agree with the new version. Especially then, because the people who are committed to your old story will resist your healing. Not because they hate you, but because your growth exposes their own stagnation. Let them go. Let go of needing them to validate your new piece. Let go of the version of you they're attached to. Let go of the urge to shrink back, just to make others feel comfortable with your light. This is your life now, and your peace is non-negotiable. You've done the explaining. You've done the apologizing. You've done the trying. Now you simply live. Not louder, not harder, but deeper, more grounded, more clear, more intentional. Because every time you choose silence instead of explaining, you honor your boundaries. Every time you choose stillness instead of reaction, you protect your nervous system. Every time you say no, without guilt, you build your self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation of lasting peace. Without it, you'll always second-guess every decision. You'll ask for advice about things you already know. You'll stay stuck in loops of approval that never satisfy. But with it, you move differently. You stop overthinking. You stop seeking. You stop spinning. And you start living. You start aligning your schedule with your soul. You start measuring success by how calm you feel when you wake up. You start prioritizing rest, not as a reward but as a right. Because peace is not something you arrive at. It's something you protect by how you move. And that movement is no longer frantic, no longer rushed, no longer for show. It's subtle, still, strong, because now you no longer fear missing out. You fear missing yourself. You no longer say yes out of guilt. You say yes out of clarity. You no longer abandon your needs to keep the peace. You realize that if you have to abandon yourself to keep the peace, it was never peace to begin with. It was performance, and you are done performing, not because you're bitter, but because you're whole, not because you're angry, but because you're aligned, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You are finally living a life that doesn't require you to explain it. And in that life there is space to breathe, space to think, space to rest, space to return to the kind of man you respect in private, the kind of man who protects peace by choosing what most never do. Stillness when they'd rather shout. Boundaries when they'd rather please. Discipline when they'd rather escape. Presence when they'd rather distract. This is how peace becomes permanent, not a feeling, but a function of how you live, what you think, and who you allow yourself to become. You don't build peace by accident, you build it by design. brick by brick, word by word, habit by habit. And most people never build it because they are too busy building for others. They build for approval. They build for status. They build for recognition. But peace is not built in the spotlight. It is built in the unseen places. In the way you speak to yourself when you fail. In the way you close the day, even when the day didn't go your way. In the way you forgive yourself without needing a reason. Because peace is not perfection, it is patience. Patience with your process. Patience with your growth. Patience with the parts of you that are still catching up to the man you're becoming. And, in that patience, you stop trying to rush what can only be built through repetition. That's the real practice, not intensity, but consistency. Not motivation, but maturity. And maturity is what allows you to finally let go of the illusion that more will make you feel better. More isn't the answer. Less is. Less pretending. Less pressure. Less performance. Because the fifth layer of peace is simplicity. And you don't arrive at simplicity until you let go of the complexity you created, trying to look like someone you never needed to be. It takes courage to live simply, to not chase, to not compare, to not perform. It takes clarity to say, this is enough, this is mine, this is what matters, and that kind of clarity only comes when you declutter your life of everything that is not essential. Not just your schedule, but your soul. You look around and ask, what am I holding that is no longer required? What weight am I carrying that was only meant for a season? What expectation am I still trying to meet that no longer matches my values? And one by one, you let go. You let go of the conversations that leave you drained. You let go of the urgency that keeps you breathless. You let go of the image you think the world needs to see. Because your peace is worth more than any illusion of success. And you finally understand that peace is not the opposite of progress. It is the foundation of it. Because from peace, you can hear. From peace, you can focus. From peace, you can act with clarity and conviction. This is what most men never learn. They think stress means importance. They think pressure means purpose. They think exhaustion is the tax of significance. But the man who walks in peace knows better. He knows that real power is not frantic. It is firm. That real wisdom is not loud. It is still. That real clarity is not complicated. It is direct. And that kind of man moves differently. He doesn't rush because he respects timing. He doesn't argue because he respects energy. He doesn't chase because he respects alignment. This is the fruit of letting go. Letting go of the old narrative that said you had to prove something to be loved. Letting go of the pressure to make every moment productive. Letting go of the pace that left your nervous system on high alert all day, every day. You are done with that. Now, you live on your own rhythm. The kind of rhythm that doesn't ask, how fast am I going, but how true am I moving? The kind of rhythm that doesn't ask, do they approve of me, but do I approve of myself? This is what simplicity gives you. Space, stillness, self-trust. And with that, you finally stop grasping. You stop overthinking. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-giving. You don't owe anyone access to the version of you that cost you your peace to create. Let that version move in silence. Let that version breathe before he responds. Let that version say no without a speech. Because now you are not interested in more. You are interested in better. Better boundaries. Better habits. Better thoughts. Better relationships. And you define better by one thing only. Does this protect my peace? If not, it doesn't belong. Peace is no longer something you chase, it's something you carry. In the way you speak, in the way you breathe, in the way you respond when the world pushes and you don't push back. Because now you've understood something most never do. That silence is not emptiness, it's strength. It's knowing you don't have to react to prove you're aware. You don't have to explain to prove you're right. You don't have to respond to protect your worth. Your worth is not in your words. It's in your walk. In your stillness. In your refusal to give energy to anything beneath your frequency. And this takes time. It takes unlearning. It takes deleting habits that once made you feel productive but only left you burned out. It takes pausing long enough to see that not every opportunity is aligned, that not every urgency is real, that not every voice deserves an answer. That's the discipline to let go. Not just of noise, but of the need to make noise. You become quieter, not because you're lost, but because you've found a deeper direction. You no longer need to defend what is lived. You no longer need to broadcast what is embodied. And in that space, you become solid, unshakable. Not because nothing affects you, but because you've trained yourself to move with intention, not reaction. You no longer mirror chaos. You model composure. This is the kind of man the world feels before he speaks. Because his presence is not built on status, it's built on standards. He does not entertain disrespect, not because he's rude, but because he is clear. He does not allow access to people who confuse connection with convenience. He does not dilute his peace to make others comfortable with his stillness. Because stillness is sacred now, it is the room where he sorts through what matters. It is the place where he reminds himself who he is before the world tries to tell him otherwise. And every time he returns to that place, he sharpens. He sharpens his focus. He sharpens his language. He sharpens his values, until everything he does moves in one direction. Clarity, stability, peace. Not the kind that needs music or sunsets or vacations, but the kind that lives in the pause before the reaction. In the breath before the reply. In the stillness before the decision, and because of this, his decisions land differently. They aren't rushed. They aren't reactive. They aren't made to please. They are made to protect. To protect his mission. To protect his time. To protect his emotional economy from anything that costs more than it gives. This is a new standard, and he doesn't rise to it by effort alone. He rises by releasing everything that once pulled him away from it. He lets go of the need to check everything, to answer everything, to fix everything, because peace is built in proportion to how many things you are willing to leave alone. You don't need to chase closure. Some things end without a final sentence. You don't need to finish every loop. Some loops are illusions designed to keep you spinning. You don't need to prove your growth. The results will speak without your voice. And so, you begin to live more simply. Not because life is smaller, but because your focus is sharper. You say, no faster. You say yes softer. You sit longer with what matters. And because of that, you feel lighter. You feel anchored. You feel less pulled and more prepared. Peace becomes your posture. It is in your spine, in your eyes, in your tone. People notice. Not because you try, but because you no longer do. You no longer hustle for identity. You embody it. You no longer argue for respect. You carry it. You no longer explain your presence. You hold it. And this is what happens when you let go of what was never yours to carry. You do not lose yourself, you return to yourself. There is a moment when you realize you don't need more information. You've read the books, you've heard the podcasts, you've had the conversations, and yet, the shift you're waiting for still hasn't arrived. Not because you don't know, but because you haven't applied what you already know. Consistently, quietly, unapologetically. That moment is the invitation. Not to consume, but to commit. Not to talk, but to train. Not to seek peace, but to become it. Because peace is not an outcome. It is a way of moving, a way of choosing, a way of responding to what life throws at you. And to live that way, you must let go of the idea that you'll ever feel fully ready. The mind will always want more preparation, more certainty, more guarantees. But peace is what you build. When you take action, without them, it's what you cultivate, in the tension between not knowing the outcome and still showing up as the highest version of yourself. That is what separates those who talk from those who transform. And transformation does not ask for an audience. It demands integrity in the invisible moments. How you speak when it's just you in the room. How you treat your time when no one is watching. How you choose your priorities when there's no one to impress. Because when your priorities are set in silence, your actions become louder than your words. And this is where peace is tested. Not when life is calm, but when it isn't. When people misunderstand you. When things don't go to plan. When nothing external affirms what you know is right internally. That's when you lean on your training, on your rituals, on your structure. The quiet structure you've built from letting go of what once distracted you. Distraction is the enemy of peace, and it rarely shows up as chaos. It shows up as options, as offers, as almost aligned. Distraction is anything that costs you clarity and sells itself as a shortcut. And the only way to see through it is to know what peace feels like, so intimately that anything that disturbs it is instantly obvious. That is your compass now, not public opinion, not external praise, not shiny opportunities, but peace. Does this protect my peace or provoke my anxiety? Does this align with who I am or activate who I used to be? Does this bring
me home to myself or pull me into a performance?
This is your filter now. And when you live with that filter, you make different decisions. You speak less, but with more weight. You move slower, but with more power. You commit to fewer things, but give them your full energy. This is the rhythm of peace. It is quiet but unmistakable. It doesn't rush, but it arrives right on time. It doesn't beg for attention, but it demands respect. And the world will feel the difference. Not because you told them, but because your presence now speaks for itself. This is what happens when you let go of the need to be seen and start living in a way that you can see yourself clearly. When your self-respect is no longer conditional. When your integrity is no longer performative. When your alignment is no longer negotiable, you stop bending for temporary comfort. You stop explaining your long-term vision to short-term minds. You stop leaking energy into relationships that only survive when you silence your truth. And instead, you preserve your space. You make room for people who meet you in stillness, who do not confuse your calm with weakness, who do not need noise to know you're present. Because now you've built something stronger than momentum. You've built peace. As a personality, a quiet confidence, a steady gaze, a kind but firm voice, a stillness that doesn't flinch even when tested. And in that peace you find a level of power that no achievement could ever give you, because it's not borrowed. It's embodied. It's not proven. It's lived. It's not chased. It's kept. And that is what makes it permanent. There is a clarity that only comes when you stop asking the world for permission, when you stop waiting for someone else to confirm what you already feel, deep in your body, quiet in your breath, still in your presence. You already know. You already see. You already sense what no longer fits, what no longer resonates, what no longer deserves to walk beside you. But you've stayed because peace felt too expensive and validation felt cheaper. Because leaving what's loud feels risky, even when the volume hurts your soul. But now you are done. Not with anger, but with certainty. Not with blame, but with clarity. Because staying in what disturbs you is no longer an option. You are willing to negotiate with. You no longer entertain what fragments your spirit. You no longer overthink what your nervous system already responded to. Because the body always knows before the mind rationalizes. And peace is often physical before it is emotional. It is in how your shoulders relax in certain spaces. It is in how your breath slows with certain people. It is in how your inner voice no longer shouts but simply observes with still confidence. And now you let that inner voice lead. Because the voice that comes after stillness is rarely wrong. It doesn't rush. It doesn't grasp. It doesn't perform. It reminds. And that reminder is the foundation of every peaceful decision you've ever made. Peaceful decisions are not always easy, but they are always clean. Clean exits, clean standards, clean choices. Not because they are perfect, but because they are pure, uncontaminated by people-pleasing, untouched by urgency, unshaken by external pressure. And you get to that place by letting go of everything that once made your decisions noisy. You stop seeking input from people who never built what you are trying to protect. You stop asking for clarity from those who are committed to their own confusion. You stop inviting feedback from voices that only know how to speak. From fear. And in that silence, you remember. You are the one who lives with the consequence, not them. So you act accordingly. You say no. Faster. You say yes. With conviction. You walk away without needing to explain the path you are now called to walk. Because calling does not require consensus, and peace cannot be crowdsourced. It is yours to build and yours to protect. And that protection doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like softness, like stepping back instead of pushing forward. Like choosing solitude instead of forcing connection. Like letting something fall apart rather than holding it together with your sanity. This is a different kind of strength. The kind that doesn't get recognized by the outside but radically transforms the inside. And over time, that transformation becomes visible. In your eyes, in your tone, in your posture, in your habits. Not because you've become harder, but because you've become clearer. You no longer confuse distraction with direction. You no longer confuse guilt with responsibility. You no longer confuse being busy with being aligned. You have finally understood that slow can be sacred, that quiet can be powerful, that leaving can be healing, and that letting go is not loss but liberation. So you continue, not with noise but with grace, not with urgency but with rhythm, not with desperation but with discernment, and discernment becomes your daily compass. Not just in what you say yes to, but more importantly, in what you walk away from without regret. That is how peace expands, not all at once, but through repetition, through steady commitment to not betraying yourself, just to maintain something that was never meant to stay. Now you walk differently. You speak slower. You listen longer. You give yourself the time, the space, the silence, to choose peace before you choose anything else. Peace is not the absence of pressure. It's the presence of principle when pressure arrives. It's not a perfect life. but a protected mind, a guarded heart, a soul that's anchored, even when everything else moves. You become that by what you release, more than what you achieve. Because the most powerful version of you is not the one who does everything. It's the one who knows what to walk away from. And the man who walks away from what no longer serves him walks lighter. He breathes deeper. He listens longer. He speaks with weight, because his words no longer come from fear but from stillness. This is the life you've been building all along, not in loud shifts, but in quiet realignments, not in dramatic changes, but in daily recommitments. Every time you say no to what disturbs your spirit, you say yes to what restores it. And that yes is not a reaction, it's a standard, one that governs who gets access, what gets attention, where your energy goes. That energy is your currency now. You no longer spend it on arguments that prove nothing, on expectations that leave you empty, on people who only see you when you're pleasing them. You've withdrawn that investment. You've redirected it inward, to your rituals, to your rhythm, to your restoration, because you finally understood that your life does not need to look full to be fulfilled, that your calendar does not need to be packed to be meaningful, that your worth does not need to be proved, only protected. And from that protection grows peace. It grows in how you enter a room, not needing to be heard, because you already listen to yourself. It grows in how you wake up without reaching for your phone, because your first connection is with presence, not pressure. It grows in how you respond to disappointment without punishing yourself for being human, because peace does not require perfection. It only asks for honesty. Honesty about what you want, about what you need, about who you are when no one else is defining you. That version of you is the most sacred. And he does not live in performance. He lives in principle, in consistency, in clarity, in choices that match his future, not his fears. You become him when you choose peace over proving. You protect him when you walk away from things that feel good but cost too much. You grow him when you stop outsourcing your value and start living like someone who already owns it. And ownership is not about control. It's about responsibility. It's standing in your story without shame. It's making decisions without guilt. It's living each day without needing the world to clap for you. Because peace doesn't need praise. It just needs permission from you to take the walk, to leave the noise, to breathe when the world says hustle, to slow down when the world says speed up, to stop reaching when your hands have already held enough. This is how peace stays, not as a moment, but as a muscle, not as a break, but as a way of being, not as something you visit when life gets too loud, but as something you live in. Even when the volume turns up, it's yours now, because you've earned it. Not through shouting, but through choosing, not through fighting, but through filtering, not through explaining, but through embodying. You don't owe the world a louder version of yourself. You owe yourself a life that feels light, honest, clear, unshaken. And you live that life by letting go of everything that kept you pretending. That is peace.